Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
The last time I stood in that living room, I was holding a tray of lasagna and pretending I didn't notice that my name was missing from the family tree quilt hanging above the mantel. Rachel's was there, embroidered twice, once in pink for daughter and once in gold for future leader. It was our mom's pride and joy, that quilt. Each cousin, uncle, grandkid, stitched in with care. I used to be on it too, near the bottom corner, until Mom quietly restitched the panel and turned my patch into a decorative acorn. No one ever mentioned it. But that was just the kind of house this was. Silent edits, quiet cuts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real moment, the one I can't seem to shake, even now, was when Dad handed Rachel the house keys and said, with a kind of finality that hit harder than any slap, "She has a real future." I didn't cry then. I didn't yell or protest or ask how the hell they thought this was fair. I just stood there, my smile frozen, a half-empty glass of store-brand Pinot Grigio sweating in my hand, watching Rachel light up like she'd just been crowned. I remember her turning to me and saying, "Don't worry, Em, there's always guest bedrooms." That was 6 years ago, and yeah, I can remember every second like I'm still in that moment, watching my family close ranks around her like I was an intruder at my own life celebration. It was supposed to be a family dinner, though that term always had flexible meaning in our house. Rachel was back in town after finishing law school and about to start some fancy internship with a downtown firm. I was working at the local community college library, not tenure track, no insurance, just enough to cover rent and the occasional emergency vet bill. And still, I showed up with lasagna I actually made from scratch, because I still believed on some level that effort might mean something. They didn't even wait for dessert. Dad cleared his throat, Frank style, which always meant something big was coming, and stood up like he was giving a speech at a company awards banquet. Mom was already beaming. Rachel had that little smile on her face, like she already knew, which, looking back, she probably did. "I want to make this official," Dad said. "We've talked it over, and we've decided the house will go to Rachel. It just makes the most sense. She's got plans, a future." There was a silence so thick I thought maybe I'd misheard him. Like maybe he was about to pivot and say, "And of course, Emily, we've set up something for you too." Or, "This is temporary, we want you both to feel supported." But no, he just sat back down like a man who'd solved a puzzle. I asked, after the room started to murmur about mortgage papers and lawyer friends, "Wait, so that's it? I don't even get asked?" Mom touched my arm like I was a child who'd dropped her ice cream. "Sweetie, you're doing fine. You don't need this place. You're strong." That's the line that still pisses me off. You're strong. Like being the family punching bag made me some kind of hero. Rachel got the house because she needed support. I got silence because I could handle it. I left before dessert. I didn't take my lasagna dish. I didn't even put on my coat, just walked out into the November cold like it might burn away the humiliation. I don't know if anyone noticed I was gone. I drove back to my tiny apartment where the heat only worked when it felt like it, curled up on the sagging couch, and let the tears come like a goddamn cliche. I was 32 years old and still letting my parents make me feel like a leftover. The months that followed were just one long exercise in swallowing it. Rachel hosted dinners at her house now, and Mom would call to casually invite me as if it weren't a slap in the face every single time. I declined most of them, citing grading or a cold or plans that never actually existed. When I did show up, it was like being a guest star in the Rachel show. Her new car in the driveway, her framed degree on the hallway wall, her wine collection that I'm pretty sure Dad bought. She even redecorated the guest room I once lived in, painted it coral and filled it with empty vases. "Minimalist," she said. It looked like a waiting room for the afterlife. I talked to Tom about it, my one real friend from college who'd stuck around. He'd say things like, "You know you don't need their validation, right?" But it's hard to explain to someone who didn't grow up like this. In our house, silence was a weapon. They never yelled. They erased you, and somehow that cut deeper than any fight. And then, a year later, came the graduation party. Rachel's husband threw it for her. Yes, she got married in the backyard I used to play in. I found out from Facebook. And yeah, I know how pathetic that sounds. But what made it worse? My mom commented under one of the photos. So proud of our only girl, I took a screenshot. Still have it. When I called finally, voice shaking, ready to demand an explanation, Mom answered like nothing was wrong. Emily, so good to hear from you. You should have come to the party, honey. We missed you. I remember sitting in my car outside of Walgreens, gripping the steering wheel so hard, my fingers went numb. I said, "You wrote only girl, Mom." A pause. "Oh, sweetheart," she laughed like it was funny. You know what I meant. I hung up. I didn't call again. That was the last time I tried to be part of their version of family. From then on, I decided I'd rather be the outsider by choice. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that life has a way of flipping the board when you least expect it. That one day, long after the party lights had dimmed and Rachel's perfect life started to unravel, they'd come knocking on my door like nothing had happened, and I'd be the one with the keys. The thing about being left out of the family narrative is that after a while, you start to narrate your own life like it's a footnote. You stop expecting calls on birthdays. You get used to sending texts that don't get replies. You pretend not to notice when the group photos on the fridge shrink by one person. I spent the better part of 4 years learning how to vanish without leaving a mess behind. And I got good at it. Too good. People think distance makes the heart grow fonder, but that's a lie we tell ourselves to excuse the fact that we stopped checking in. After the house was handed over, I moved into a small second-floor unit above a hardware store in a town nobody brags about. The rent was cheap, the neighbors smoked inside, and the windows whistled when it rained. But it was mine, and more than that, it was separate. Nobody knew me there. I could go grocery shopping without bumping into people from high school asking, "So what have you been up to?" in that tone that always carries a trace of pity. I started collecting silence like it was a hobby. I told myself it was peace. Tom came by every other Saturday with beer and sarcasm. We'd sit on the balcony, really just a rusty fire escape, and talk about work, relationships, and how our parents had subtly convinced us we were disappointing without ever saying it directly. He was the only person I told everything to. The only one who knew how much it still stung that my sister got the one thing I thought I'd eventually inherit. Not because I wanted the house, but because I wanted to matter enough for them to think of me. The house was just the symbol. The neon sign screaming, you don't count. Tom once asked me if I'd ever confront them about it. Tell them straight out how unfair it was. I think I laughed for 5 minutes. What would I even say? Hey, remember that time you gave away my entire childhood without asking? It wouldn't change anything. They'd just say they did what was best for Rachel, which was code for, we chose her and we're not sorry about it. Work was fine, not great, not awful, just fine. I helped students find resources, filed paperwork, taught the occasional online research class. No one remembered my name past midterms, and I didn't mind. I stopped trying to move up. Promotions meant interviews meant talking about my career goals. And I didn't have any. I just wanted to pay rent, buy groceries, and avoid emotional landmines. That became enough. Somewhere in the middle of year 2, I adopted a rescue dog, an old black lab mix with cloudy eyes and a limp named Boomer. He snored like a grown man and hated everyone except me and Tom. I'd tell him stories at night like he understood every word. I told him about the time Rachel cut my hair while I was sleeping when we were kids, and Dad laughed instead of scolding her. I told him about the time Mom told me not to wear red to my own graduation because it would clash with Rachel's dress in the photos. Boomer listened better than my whole family combined. Then, just when I'd settled into this strange version of stability, it happened. Thanksgiving came around again, and I decided, stupidly, optimistically, to show up. I even made pumpkin bread and put on real jeans. I drove 2 hours back to the old neighborhood, pulled up to the curb in front of the house, and noticed there were no cars in the driveway. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no updates. Just the last message from Mom saying, Dinner at 5. Can't wait. I rang the bell. No answer. I waited 20 minutes. Still nothing. Finally, I called. Mom picked up, sounding surprised. Emily, what's wrong? I'm at the house, I said, my breath fogging in the cold. Where is everyone? Oh, sweetie, she said, and I swear I heard Rachel's laugh in the background. Didn't you get my message? Dinner's off. Rachel's not feeling well. I didn't say a word. I just ended the call and got back in my car. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the dark house, my hands shaking not from the cold, but from the humiliation. Then I drove straight to Tom's place and spent the rest of the evening watching reruns and drinking wine that tasted like vinegar. He didn't ask what happened. He just handed me the blanket and said, "Let me guess, Rachel's sick and somehow you're the disease." The next day I unfollowed them all on social media, not because I was mad, but because I couldn't take it anymore. The curated posts, the family brunches, the photo captions like, "Blessed beyond measure," while I sat alone on a couch with a dog who coughed more than he barked. I started to believe they didn't just forget about me, they preferred a version of their life where I didn't exist. Time moved weird after that. Not fast, not slow, just directionless. Boomer died in early spring. He'd been sick for weeks, and when the vet finally gave me that look, I knew. I held him while he drifted off, and I didn't cry until 3 days later, in the cereal aisle at the store, when I reached for his usual brand of treats. That grief hit harder than anything my parents ever said or didn't say. It was clean. It was honest. One afternoon, nearly 4 years after the house incident, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was short. "Ms. Carter, we're reaching out regarding the property at 312 Oakview Lane. There are some unresolved title issues. Please return our call." My stomach dropped. Oakview Lane, their house. Except now, apparently, it was mine. I called back, assuming it was some scam or mix-up, but it wasn't. Turned out the house had never been properly transferred to Rachel. Legal technicalities, debt issues, unfiled paperwork, and now, due to unpaid taxes and a lien from some failed investment my father had co-signed, the house was going to auction unless a family member stepped in. Since Rachel had moved to the West Coast and my parents were in no financial shape to do anything, it fell to me, the forgotten one. I didn't hesitate. Not out of spite, not at first, just instinct. I paid what was needed, signed the papers, and within 2 weeks, I held the deed to the house I had once been told I'd never be good enough for. The day I walked through the front door, key in hand, the silence inside felt different. Not empty, cleansed, like someone had finally turned off the Rachel soundtrack. I stood in the kitchen, opened every drawer, and laughed when I found a spoon engraved with her initials. I kept it. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the front porch, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in circles like we used to. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not happy exactly, but grounded. And that's when the idea came. I wasn't going to live in that house. No, I was going to turn it into something else. Something that served me for once. I picked up my phone, searched for local listings, and posted it for rent. A week later, a man named Ben signed the lease. And that was the beginning of everything. I didn't go into that meeting with the real estate attorney thinking I was going to buy anything, let alone the house that had been the epicenter of every quiet betrayal I'd ever swallowed. I showed up wearing jeans with a rip in the thigh and a coffee stain on my sleeve, expecting maybe some paperwork to sign or a quick confirmation that the place was officially someone else's problem. Instead, I sat across from a man named Daryl, bald, efficient, not the kind of guy who did small talk, while he calmly explained that my name was now the primary heir, listed on the property documentation. Apparently, at some point years back, my father had attempted to transfer the deed to Rachel but hadn't followed through. There was a missing signature, some unpaid taxes, a judgment or two, and now with Rachel off the grid and my parents in no financial shape to act, the whole thing had landed on my plate. Daryl tapped a stack of papers with a pen and said, "You can let it go to auction, or you can pay the outstanding fees and assume ownership. Up to you. There wasn't a dramatic moment of reflection, no swelling music in the background or montage of childhood memories flashing through my head. I just looked at the numbers, looked at my account balance, and thought, screw it. Fine, I'll take the damn house. It felt like making a sarcastic bet with the universe. Like if I leaned into this twist hard enough, maybe the cosmic joke would finally start working in my favor. So I wrote the check, I signed the papers, and just like that, the house I was told I didn't need, the one that had been handed to my sister like some family crown, was now mine. Not through love or inheritance, but through paperwork and debt. The first time I walked back into that house with the deed in hand, it felt like trespassing. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The ceilings weren't as high, the kitchen tiles weren't as pristine, and the carpet in the living room still had the same weird ripple it had when we were kids, like the floor was always trying to trip you up. It smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, and there was a fine layer of sadness coating everything, like the house knew it had been abandoned in more ways than one. I spent the first weekend there doing what I told myself was cleaning, but what really amounted to a slow, deliberate inventory of everything left behind. Rachel hadn't taken much when she moved out. A few clothes, some wall art, probably anything with a price tag. But the bones of her were still everywhere. The pink ribbon she once tied around her closet door handle, the sticky note inside the medicine cabinet that said, "Don't forget mascara," in her perfect bubble handwriting. I found an old USB drive labeled Bar Prep Notes and almost threw it out the window. Instead, I shoved it in a drawer next to some expired coupons and a keychain that said, "Best daughter ever." I thought about living there for a minute, about maybe reclaiming it, painting over the coral walls she picked out, replacing the framed motivational quotes with something actually worth reading. But the idea of waking up every day inside that history made my stomach twist. I couldn't live in that space and not hear echoes of everything I wasn't. So instead, I opened a browser tab and typed in, "How to rent out a single-family home legally." It was time the house started working for me. The listing went live a week later. I kept the rent reasonable, below market even. I wasn't looking to get rich. I just wanted someone else to sleep in that master bedroom so I wouldn't have to imagine Rachel doing it. I posted a few pictures, gave a brief tour, and waited. Then came Ben. He didn't look like a guy who was browsing for a suburban rental. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s, wore jeans like he meant it. Carried a coffee thermos and had a quiet way of looking at things, like he already knew the ending. He asked a few questions, mostly about the plumbing and the water heater. I liked that. Practical. No nonsense. He didn't smile much, but he had this kind of polite stillness about him that felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Like he'd seen his share of empty rooms and never expected them to love him back. The lease was signed in less than 48 hours. No haggling, no weird requests. Just a handshake and a promise to keep things tidy. As I handed over the keys, something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, more like a recognition, like he saw me and understood, without either of us saying anything, that this was more than just a transaction. "I'll take good care of it," he said. And I believed him. For the first time in a long time, I drove away from that house without feeling like I had to look back. It wasn't mine to live in anymore, but it was mine in the ways that mattered. I had turned the place that once symbolized my rejection into something that worked for me, and that felt like its own kind of win. Later that night, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window of my apartment, staring out at nothing. The quiet buzz of traffic below, the clink of glass against countertop, the soft glow of a new beginning. It should have been peaceful. And then my phone lit up. A voicemail from my mother. "Emily, we heard about the house. Please don't rent it out. We need to talk." No apology, no warmth, just panic wrapped in sugar. I didn't call back. I finished my drink, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. It was too late. The lease was final. It was 2 days after I handed Ben the keys that the knock came, sharp and deliberate, like someone trying not to seem desperate while being completely and utterly desperate. I had been back in my apartment for less than 48 hours, barely settled into the strange peace that came from signing over the house. Not to my parents, not to my sister, but to a stranger. And already I felt the gravity of old obligations crawling up my spine again. I knew before I even looked through the peephole that it was them. Something in my gut had already turned sour, the way it used to when I was younger, and forgot to RSVP to Rachel's latest life milestone event, and found myself on the receiving end of a 3-minute voicemail, dripping in guilt, and just enough passive aggression to qualify as an art form. I opened the door slowly, casually, as though I hadn't heard the knock the first time. And there they were, my parents, standing side by side in the narrow hallway of my building like two statues from a museum I never asked to visit. My mother looked thinner than I remembered, her cardigan hanging off her shoulders like it had given up trying to stay in place. My father stood slightly behind her, arms crossed, jaw clenched in that signature "I'm not here to apologize" way he'd perfected since I was a teenager. The silence between us was immediate and loaded, like a scene from a play that had been rehearsed 1,000 times, and yet everyone forgot their lines. "Emily," my mother said first, always the chosen emissary for family shame. We didn't know who else to call. I didn't invite them in. I didn't ask how they were. I just stood there, hand on the edge of the door, letting them squirm a little longer in the hallway of the daughter they had comfortably ignored for years. "We heard about the house," she said, eyes darting past me. Like maybe she expected to see Rachel lounging on my couch with a mimosa, flipping through real estate listings. "You can't, Emily, you can't rent it out." "I already did," I said. No inflection, no apology, just the facts. Her mouth opened slightly like she might say something, but nothing came out. My father finally stepped forward, clearing his throat like he always did before delivering the kind of pronouncement that wasn't meant to be questioned. "We need that house," he said, not asking, not pleading, just stating. "Rachel's gone, took off. Her place got repossessed and we had to co-sign on a loan she defaulted on. We lost almost everything." I leaned against the door frame, more out of instinct than comfort. "So now you want to move back in? After giving it away? After telling me I didn't need it because I was the strong one?" My father's face tightened. "We didn't mean it like that." "No?" I asked, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "How exactly did you mean it when you told me Rachel had a real future and I had, what, a fallback plan?" My mother's eyes welled up, whether from guilt or fatigue, I couldn't tell. But it was too little, too late. That house had stopped being theirs the moment they decided I was expendable. The moment they chose a daughter who treated them like stepping stones over the one who quietly showed up until she finally didn't. "She didn't tell us," my mother said suddenly, a crack in her voice. "About the money, about what she was doing, we didn't know." "Didn't know or didn't want to know?" I asked. Not cruelly, just honestly. "You gave her the house. You gave her your savings. You gave her everything. And now you want to come back and pretend it was just a mistake?" My father shifted, his silence a sure sign that the control he once had in these situations was slipping. "We're not here to argue," he said. "We're asking for help." I could have melted then. Part of me wanted to. The little girl inside who once sat at the kitchen table pretending not to cry when Rachel got a bigger slice of birthday cake whispered that maybe this was the moment I could make things right. That maybe I'd finally be acknowledged for stepping up when no one else would. But the woman I had become, the one who had crawled out of their emotional quicksand and learned to build boundaries like brick walls, knew better. Some stories don't get happy endings. Some families don't circle back. And some debts don't get paid with guilt. "The lease is final," I said simply. "He signed for a year. I'm not breaking it." My mother inhaled sharply, like she'd been slapped. My father looked away, suddenly fascinated by the scuff marks on my hallway wall. And then, without another word, they turned and walked away. No hug, no thanks, no attempt at reconciliation. Just two people who had gambled on the wrong child and lost. I closed the door slowly and didn't move for several minutes, just stared at the wood like I might find some meaning in the grain. The heaviness in my chest wasn't satisfaction or triumph. It was mourning. Not for the house or the history, or even for Rachel, but for the final nail in the coffin of a family I had tried for too long to belong to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced. I poured wine I didn't drink. I opened old boxes just to remind myself why I had built this wall between us in the first place. And around midnight, there was another knock. Not loud, not frantic, just steady. I opened the door expecting no one and found Ben instead. He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes soft but steady. "I know it's late," he said, "but I thought you should know something about your sister." I blinked, confused. "You know Rachel?" He nodded slowly. "I used to work for her husband, the guy she left. Let's just say, there's a lot you probably don't know." The hair on my arm stood up. Ben stepped back, gave me a small, unreadable smile, and said, "We'll talk when you're ready." Then he disappeared down the stairs, leaving me standing in the doorway of a life that suddenly felt far from over. I didn't sleep the night Ben knocked on my door and dropped that quiet, confusing bomb into the center of my already splintered world. I tried, I really did, curled up on the same thrift store couch I'd had since grad school, blanket wrapped around me, TV buzzing with some late-night infomercial about ceramic knives that could slice through copper pipes. My eyes stayed open while my mind ran through every possible version of what he might have meant. I thought I had unearthed the worst of it already, that my parents had sold me out for the daughter with shinier prospects, that Rachel had squandered everything they gave her and vanished, and that somehow I was still the one expected to clean it all up. But now there was something new, a deeper layer, and Ben was the kind of man who didn't say things lightly. By the next morning, I was so wound up I didn't even bother with coffee. I threw on a jacket over my sleep shirt, slid into a pair of jeans, and drove straight to the house, my house, now occupied by the man who seemed to know more about my sister's life than I ever had. I parked down the block, sat in the car for a minute with my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and then marched up the walkway like I had every right to demand answers from a tenant I barely knew. Ben answered the door like he had been expecting me, which made me more nervous than I wanted to admit. He stepped aside without a word, gestured toward the living room, and I followed him into a space that no longer felt like Rachel's shrine. It had been changed subtly but definitely. Her framed diplomas were gone. The glass coffee table was replaced with something wooden and worn, like it had stories of its own. There was a potted plant near the window that looked healthy, which meant someone actually cared for it. The house had stopped pretending to be perfect, and I respected that. I didn't sit down. I didn't even ask how he was. I stood there, heart thudding like a slow drum beat, and said, "What do you know about my sister?" Ben didn't flinch. He moved to the mantel, picked up a mug, took a slow sip, and then finally spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had thought carefully about what to say. "I worked for her husband for 3 years. He ran a consulting firm, small, private, heavily leveraged. Rachel was listed as a co-founder, even though she never showed up for meetings and barely responded to emails. But she had access to the accounts." He looked at me then, not pitying, not accusing, just watching, like he was measuring whether I could handle the truth. I said nothing, waiting. "She drained them," he continued. "Slowly at first. It started with small transfers, personal expenses run through the business. Then it got bigger, loans, credit cards. She pulled out nearly $80,000 over the course of a year. When the IRS came sniffing around, she skipped town, took what she could, and left your parents holding what was left." The room was so quiet I could hear the second hand on the wall clock, ticking like a countdown to some unseen disaster. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse into that couch and let it swallow me whole. But more than anything, I wanted to stop pretending that any of this surprised me. Somewhere deep inside, I think I always knew Rachel was built for escape, not endurance. "So why tell me?" I asked, finally sitting down because my legs felt like water. "Why now?" Ben sat across from me, setting his mug down on the edge of the coffee table like it might shatter if he wasn't careful. "Because I've been where you are. Not with family, but with people who rewrite history to suit their story. You deserve to know the truth, not just the pieces they hand you when it's convenient. I nodded slowly, not because it made me feel better, but because it finally made everything make sense. The way Rachel could lie without blinking, the way my parents covered for her like it was a reflex, even when it meant sacrificing someone else. The years I spent wondering what I had done wrong when the truth was simply that I had never been their favorite story to tell. After I left, I drove aimlessly for a while, passing the old church, the rundown mall, the diner where I had once kissed someone in the parking lot who never called me back. The past was layered across that town like bad wallpaper, peeling in corners but still stubbornly there. I thought about calling my mother, not to demand anything, not even to confront her, just to see what she would say if I told her I knew. But I didn't need to. The letter came a week later. It arrived in an envelope with no return address, the handwriting unmistakably hers. Slightly loopy, overly neat, like she was always trying to impress someone even on paper. Inside was one page, no salutation, no apology, no explanation, just one line. "We thought you didn't need us." I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in a drawer with the USB drive, the engraved spoon, and the acorn patch from the family quilt. Some silences aren't broken by apologies. They're filled by the decisions you make when no one's watching. A month passed. Ben kept to himself. Rent arrived on time. The neighborhood settled back into its quiet rhythms. I took a trip out of town, stayed in a small cabin by the lake, didn't check my phone for 3 days. When I came back, there was a postcard in my mailbox, no return address, just a photo of a beach and one word on the back. California. Rachel, no apology, no explanation. Just proof she was still moving, still drifting, still choosing the next version of herself. I didn't keep it. Instead, I sat down at my desk and started writing my own letter. Not to her, not to my parents, but to myself. Not forgiveness, not closure, just acknowledgement that I had survived the fire they kept feeding and come out something tougher, something sharper. A few weeks later, Ben asked me what I planned to do with the house after his lease ended. I looked up from my coffee, met his eyes, and smiled, dry, steady, unapologetic. Maybe I'll rent it to another golden child, just to keep the ghosts company. And for the first time, the house didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a decision I made on purpose.